Hello and thank you so much for joining me. For this month's project, I created this altered MDF moon that features lots of mechanicals, some pretty sparkly blues, and a little bit of rust. I hope you enjoy my process. I started by adhering some random scraps of paper with a little bit of soft glass gel. There's no real rhyme or reason to this process, it's just laying some paper down for some texture later on. I like to use paper because honestly, I probably have more paper than anyone can use in a lifetime, and I like to put it to good use. I didn't add any clear gesso to this MDF board, I'm just going with it. Most of it gets covered with the paper, there's a lot of gel on the project, and I know that I'm not going to go crazy with my medium, so I'm not too concerned about it at this point in time. But if you're not sure and you feel more comfortable with gesso, by all means add it. I just didn't grab it out of the drawer, so I didn't do it. No big deal. I knew what I was doing, and I knew that I really didn't need that extra layer, if that makes sense. Anyhow, I'm continuing to add some soft glass gel and just layering my paper, trying to get some squares and some random bits here and there. As you can see, this is about, I want to say maybe a 6.5 inch moon. This is from the Mix palette, and she's going to have lots of amazing designs that I'm sure you will need to have in your stash. Anyhow, I'm just continuing to add little layers of paper here and there. Some are straight, some are not straight. It just depends on however they were clipped. Once I'm happy with my layer of paper, I'm going to give that a quick dry, and I'll of course do that off camera because there's no reason for you to see that dry. And I'm going to use this Gothic stencil from Finnabair and a little bit of graphite paste. I do pretty much cover the whole moon with graphite paste, but I really wasn't trying to. I guess I'm just a little heavy-handed today. Once that was dry, I'm going to go ahead and add some liquid acrylics, and this is where I'm bringing my blue in. I'm going to use 2 of Finnabair's liquid acrylics and lots of water. This darker, I think it's Parisian blue, maybe? And then probably Ultramarine. And I'm just going to mix these all in. And I'm using lots of water with this, but again, I'm going to dry this right away, so I wasn't too worried about that layer of gesso that I talked about earlier. I will have all the products that I use listed below, so you'll be able to find everything that you need to make this little moon for yourself. Anyhow, moving on, I'm adding a little bit of metallic paint, and this I am going to use a lot of water with, but again, I'm drying this right away in between the layers, so it's just giving me a little bit of shine and brightening up the moon just a tiny bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some sparks paint. This I'm using very heavy-handedly, and I'm just randomly placing this around. I'm not going to add water to it. This is just for extra shine and a little bit of dimension. Some splatters because, hey, why not? Now I'm going to go ahead and start building my cluster. And for this, I'm starting with a large mitt form that I've had in my stash for some time, and I guess I've been hoarding it to some degree. But I'm just going to use it because, you know, I bought these products to use, so I'm going to use them. So with that in mind, I'm continuing to add lots of metal bits around my mechanical moon. I'm not going to use any resin pieces because I have all these mechanicals in my stash, and by golly, I'm going to use them. And with that in mind, I'm just moving around some mechanicals around this moon until I'm happy with the placement of all my gears. I'm going to go ahead and add some buttons, some bolts, and some knobs, and then I'll go ahead and give that a quick dry. So while I was digging in my stash, I found this adorable little locket. So I went ahead, and I'm going to show you in just a second, and I added the Finnabair moth inside the locket, and I'm going to make it a tiny little shaker. So I'm sprinkling some glitter, some glass beads, and a little bit of micro beads. Not too much because this absolutely is a tiny little locket. I know that Finnabair has lockets, but I think this one actually might be a Tim Holtz locket. Like I said, it was in my stash. I have no idea on the packaging, but I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll find something. But it's just a fun little shaker now, and who doesn't love the Finnabair moth? So with some buttons to secure it, and by secure it I mean just give it a little bit of balance in the background to hold it more securely, I'm adding a couple more gears to balance it so it lays flat, and that's what I'm adding this next gear for. So with heavy body gel, it is now in place, and I've covered the glass to try and keep it a little bit clean. I do have to wipe it in the process later, but for the most part I kept paint off of the glass. So this is just a random bit of bling that I have in my stash that I colored with a little bit of alcohol ink, and that is just so it would match, and you'll see me place that later. Back to the moon, I am adding a quick layer of rust. Now this I'm doing very delicately, and I'm not being heavy-handed at all. I'm just using a brush and randomly placing rust around the moon. Just here and there, not too crazy. Normally I would spray this and let this flow around, but this is such a small moon, I want to keep it very controlled, and I want my placement of my rust to be very specific. So just to make the rust look a little bit more natural, I did dip my paintbrush into my water cup and just gave it a little bit of movement here and there. I'm going to give that a quick dry, and then I'm going to start adding some liquid acrylics, and I'm going to use Carmine and burnt sienna, and that's just to add a little bit more richer color to this rust. And I'm going to let this flow a little bit more into all that paper dimension that I added in the background in the earlier steps. So you'll see me add the paint. I'm going to give it a little squirt and let that paint move. Now I do wind up dabbing off a bunch of this, and that's because I don't want it to be overwhelmed. I do want the blue to shine through, but I still do want the paint to flow into all those little crevices that I created with the paper and the graphite paste in the beginning. So you can see a little tiny bit of paint, a lot of water, and a little bit of dabbing. I'm going to go ahead and dry this before I start adding my next layer of burnt sienna, and I'm a little bit more heavy-handed with the burnt sienna. That's going to come in now, and with this I'm actually very kind of specific, and I'm trying to push it into the different lines that the paper has created. Anything that I want to add a little bit of depth and dimension to is what I'm trying to do with the burnt sienna. Then I'm going to go ahead and give that a dry. And I'm going to continue adding little touches of paint to anywhere where I think needs a little bit more color. Tedious, I know, but it is part of my process. So I'm just going to keep randomly placing little bits of paint and give it a dry once it's all done. While I'm doing that, if you haven't already, please consider giving this video a thumbs up. I do greatly appreciate it. Or even become a subscriber or leave a comment. Anything is greatly appreciated. Okay, back to me adding paint. Now I'm going to give this a quick dry, and then you're going to see me add just a little bit of splatters, and I just took that paintbrush right out of my cup and added a little bit of rust splatters. A little dab of glue for the bling that we dyed earlier, and now I'm going to add some rich copper wax. I'm doing this very, very light. It almost looks like there's none there, but when I do take the pictures you can see there's a very, very tiny layer of color. I just really didn't want the wax to take over. I love the wax. I love everything about it. Just sometimes I feel like too much is it's just too easy for the wax to take over. So I'm trying to use this little bristle brush, which actually I really love, and they come in a set of 3 or 5, but I do love them. They're very handy, and it's an easy way to control the wax so you don't get too heavy-handed. So now I'm continuing to add a light layer of aged brass, and that's really going to wrap this up. I do go in and add a couple tiny little pieces of bling from my stash, but I do that off camera because I didn't realize that I really wasn't happy with just the one gem being on there. It didn't feel balanced to me, so I would go ahead and I added just a couple little pieces of bling that you'll see in the final pictures. A little shake, 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 and that's it for this moon. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Thanks again, guys. Bye-bye.